I'm Andrea Perry from Worth Publishing and CourseWeDo. You're very welcome. This is the webinar on play with ALISON WOOLF. She's an early years educator, a play therapist and university lecturer, currently supervising dissertation students on the Wrexham, you'll have to say it for me, Alison. Glendoor, thank you very much. The Wrexham Glendoor Master's degree, Play, Policy and Practice. And she's also the author of Better Play, which we'll come to later on. So her research interests include the role of free play sessions in schools and the emotional content and context of play as experienced by the child. So Alison, you are enormously welcome. Handing to you.
Thank you, Andrea. It's good to be with everyone this afternoon and lovely to spend some time thinking about something that I'm so passionate about with all of you today. And we're going to think about how play might help us to bounce back better. And Andrea and I, when we were discussing today, we're thinking about a lot of the terminology at the moment about build back better and how much energy that must take, whereas bounce back better suggests that we already have some energy and that we can use that, and we might bounce in a different direction, but we might be able to bounce back better through all the challenges that are being presented with us at the moment. I'm just going to invite all of you to just join in an activity with me at the moment. I'm going to ask you to peer into my box of buttons. I'm going to ask you to think, if you could, is there a button there that you would choose? I'm going to invite you to have a look and see if there's a button that you think is calling to you or that you feel that you want to reach out for. Is there something about one of those buttons that is speaking to you now? Hold that thought and move forward. So, what are terms are really important when we're discussing things, and we'll come to the term of play and how important it is that we have some sense of all being on the same page with that. So I'm going to start with what bounce back ability means. And to me, there's lots of words I might use rather than bounce back, such as cope, survive, manage, handle, pull through. But the really important thing about that is that then we carry on. We don't just survive, we don't just cope, we cope, survive, and then we carry on. So that's where the bounce comes in. I noticed during lockdown 1 or first lockdown, or whatever we're calling it these days, that there were lots of reports that one thing we were doing a lot more of was dreaming, and that was linked to the anxieties, the changes, coming to terms with difference. And Colin Espy wrote about this, that the dreams are a window into the way that the brain is busy processing emotion, and that if our dreams are more emotional, which might be my remembering them more, and it might be because we're all a bit more emotional at the time, and it made me think straight away that perhaps I should be playing more. If I need to dream more, then for me, play and dreams very much mirror each other. I see them as very connected. Dreams, daydreams and playing, and all that subconscious need to process and to let things bubble up. And the way that in dreams and in children's play, we put odd things together that didn't happen at the same time or weren't with the same people, but somehow we're making those links, we're making sense of it all. So I want to think about why we might need to play more, as well as the fact that it was noted that we possibly were dreaming more, or just that we noticed we were dreaming more, or that the dreams were so vivid we remembered them more. That's something that we may find out as research comes along later on. So we're going to think about what I mean by play and what we might all mean by play in terms of this hour we're spending together today. So I'm thinking about play that's freely chosen, play that bubbles up, it's innately driven, comes from somewhere, and it's set apart from our real life and our everyday life. It has a place of its own, a world of its own. And play that we want to talk about today is the play that exists for its own sake. So going back to the buttons and my invitation to join in and to choose a button, one of the things I want to say about play is that absolutely it has to be some kind of choice from the person who's playing, and not wanting to choose a button is absolutely the right thing. If you didn't feel moved to choose one of the buttons, then that's absolutely the right thing to do. But if you did choose, I'm really interested to think, how did you know which one to choose? Did one call out to you? Did one immediately trigger some kind of a memory or some kind of a feeling or a sense? Or was it clear because you love bright red that you're going to choose a bright red one? Or did a button have a different meaning? I know when I look at my button box, there's a couple of them and I just think straight away of a shield. And some of the colours and some of the texture to me might make me think of a sweet. So there's that symbolic sense as well, that I might choose something for a reason that has nothing to do with the fact it's a button. And it's that sense that sometimes something inside of us is telling us something. And I've worked in schools for many years, and I used to run sessions where children had free play for half an hour a week. And it was a group free play session, and we did some research into it. And one of the ways that we researched it was to interview the children. And this answer will always stay with me when I asked one of the Year 6 boys, how do you know what to choose to play with? And he just said straight away, something what tells me to go over there. So obvious. I just know. So it wasn't a case of, oh, I played there last week, I'll play somewhere different this week, or where have my friends gone? He tapped into his internal wise self, and he just knew, no question, where he was going to go and play. So I think that we could all maybe listen a little bit more to our internal wise selves and let ourselves do things that's being cried out to be done, and that might include play. So Jean-Paul Sartre said, the desire to play is fundamentally the desire to be. So it's that tied into who we are, that one of the ways we become is through playing, and one of the ways we express us is through playing. So I think if we bear that in mind, that that is how important play is, and it's so fundamentally part of how we become who we are. So if we can, for this time, think that we can all buy into this is our definition of play for now, and how does play that is needs driven from inside help us to build our bounce back ability? Play is such a broad subject, such a huge area of interest. So I've just picked out some elements of resilience that we know are fostered through free play. Adaptability, a sense of control, creativity, balance, purpose, and our sense of meaning. So that's a big package, isn't it? That in play we can be experiencing all of those things. And when we hear about resilience, if you listen to people talking about countries that are resilient, maybe because they're adaptable. There's a lot of research and a lot of interest now in referring people for art groups or gardening groups or creativity that can build their resilience and their physical and mental health. Stuart Brown says, through play, we lose our balance. We sometimes get surprised. We don't know where we're going. And actually, the resolution of that is that we find our balance. And you'll never see a child as purposeful as when they're engaging in the play that they want to do. So we certainly know that that's something that's developed through play. And children are so little and so lacking in any kind of power, but their play is theirs and they really have control of it. And that makes them feel that they have some control over their lives and some sense of power in their play. And then play, as I talked about dreaming, has the same role, that it might help us to unpick and to reconfigure and to make sense and meaning out of our experiences. The International Play Association, this is a link, they've written us a really helpful leaflet this year about play in crisis for families at times of crisis during the COVID epidemic, and how play can help their children to be resilient. So they state that playing is strongly linked to creativity, involves imagination and problem solving. So that's our creativity and adaptability balls from the previous slide. Playing may involve children repeating and acting out events again and again and again. And this is one way of helping them to understand what's been happening and give them a sense of meaning. And acting about our feelings in our play helps us to come to terms with our feelings and to feel more in control, and gives us that sense of control, and hopefully over time gives us more of a sense of balance and grounding. And playing allows a child to develop their own strengths and abilities to cope, and they get a sense of purpose and strength through really solving their own problems and building their own resilience. So this picture is a picture of some play, pre-COVID play, and yet when I look at it now, I think sometimes I'd just like to play, and what wouldn't I like to do to people who have changed our lives, or the actual virus itself, and how a child have so much going on in their lives, and yet in their play they can do as they want to meet those internal needs. And whether the child may see themselves as the person who's standing there going, get out of that now, see if you can, or whether they feel that they're the person who's struggling and caught up and can't get out, we don't need to know that. We need to witness and be there, and just be there while the child expresses themselves. And if they talk to us and tell us, then we listen. And if they just play, then we're just there. And what the child gets out of that may be what that child needs. Or as in the previous slide, they may return to that again and again. It may change until they do get out of it whatever they need. But play is powerful, and we don't always need to know what the power is that's going on there. If we shield children completely from opportunities to test their stress response, they will forever be slightly anxious in facing new situations. And one of the places children challenge themselves is in their play. When a child's been afraid in real life, they may choose to develop some play that actually makes them feel anxious. And in play, they can make themselves feel the right level of anxiety that they know they can cope with, and then they can push it, and they can stop that play whenever they want, which is such an important element of play, that it can be over when it's over. And yet children will expose themselves to stress in their play and challenge in their play, and we will witness them building that resilience rather than rescuing them and not letting them build that resilience. So Priston Cusworth said it's really important that in play we allow children to experience all sorts of stresses and anxieties so that they can prepare themselves for real life new situations. I've picked several things from Sandra Russ's work because I just felt it was a place here to bring together some of the things that we know children develop resilience through in play. And one of the reasons that I really like Sandra's work is because she's looked at her research over longer periods of time. So talking about children who in pretend play develop divergent thinking, their ability to organise, and learning to cope through imagination and pretend play and fantasy play, learn effective coping strategies, more than one strategy. Sometimes it's absolutely right that we give up, and sometimes it's absolutely right that we persevere, and we need more than one strategy to cope, to be resilient. And Russ's research showed that through play, finding that those children did develop those responses was tested again, and that increase in their resilience lasted over considerable periods of time. And this week could not be better to be talking about immunity and inoculation and vaccination, and how we can have both physical vaccination against threat and emotional vaccination against threat. So play can inoculate against stress and anxiety, and it can produce physical and emotional responses to threats, and both of those can be seen to be similar. So D'Acquisto says both systems, emotional and physical systems, learn to adjust to challenges of the external environment through vaccinations, which could be lessons for the physical immune system or lessons for the emotional system. And we can learn some of those lessons for our emotional system. Hey, I survived feeling scared. Ha, I managed to sort out that problem for myself, and we can do that in play. Margot Sunderland, many of you may know, I saw in the chat at the beginning that many of you work with children who have some additional needs or work in services that are external to mainstream classrooms. And you may have heard of Margot Sunderland and her great work in training many of us and supporting many of us through her books and her stories for children. But she understands that actually play does change the chemical state and the way that we're feeling, and that the chemical rewards of play can help us to manage and to manage states of physical stress, and that it actually increases chemicals that support our immune system and decreases chemicals that may damage our immune system. And that while outdoor play, we understand from research, has a huge impact on developing our immune system, not least the vitamin D, but also the research about how just being out in the green has a real impact on our body. But also play has a physical impact on our brains and our body, and helps to develop our both physical and even more emotional and social immunity. I know that, again, many of you work with children where you'll be very aware of the importance of attachment in building a child's resilience. And I do see attachment and play as, I would say, mostly the answer to everything. They're things that I find seem to come up again and again in conversations, that these are the two things that could really help us to build our resilience. And what I want you to take away from today is that play is something that's very immediate. It can be free. I saw that some of you in the chat worked with children in the looked after system, and you'll be very aware how long it may take some of these children to build new attachments and to feel safe with us. But we can actually provide play very quickly and provide a safe enough environment for play that most children who might be a bit wary about building their relationship with us may sooner feel that they can engage in play. And Stuart Brown says that people who've not had enough play rebound when they're given that play that they need. So I want you to really think about the fact that this is quite an immediate and could be free, might not be very expensive way that we can help children at this time. And Charney and Southwick have written a book, and I was disappointed that they didn't actually talk much about play, but when you look at it, their research about how people who are incarcerated in war situations, how their ability just within themselves, with free time and their mind, they were able to do remarkable things. And the resilience that they found, was these people who were able to develop their coping skills by thinking, daydreaming. And one man they talked about, he set himself challenges by asking himself mathematical equations and increasing the difficulty and experiencing the challenge. And we know that children develop their resilience through giving themselves challenge and play. And another one that really tied into me, because it's something that I'm really interested in, he dreamt about his home that he would like to create once he was free. And actually, when he was free, that's what he did. He went on to design and build his own home. So I think that we could really think, if we didn't have very much at all, or even for older children, if we had nothing, if we allow children to have that daydream time, or we allow young children to play with very minimal resources, they can really do remarkable things. Going on to a larger picture and thinking about how play and playfulness can be really helpful in strengthening communities. So have you noticed anything playful appearing in your community? From the very beginning of the first lockdown, I noticed when I was out walking, particularly in the woods near to us, that people were hanging salt dough decorations in the trees. They might have said smile, they might have said thank you NHS, there were rainbows, there were all sorts of things appearing from nowhere. And more recently, I noticed that in the planter in the middle of the village, there were these tiny painted stones hidden away in amongst the plants. And again, I think that's that sense of when we're being playful, we increase the difficulty. And if you've played with young children, which I know that if you've come today, that either with your own children or in your workplace, you will have experienced the same thing that I think is universal in children. When they're little, they say, I'm going to hide, can you find me? And before you've had time to say, I wonder, they're giving you clues, or they're saying, here I am, because they cannot tolerate that waiting. Or if they're saying, can you guess what my secret is? Can you guess what my secret is? And you're just thinking, oh, wonder what that might be. And then straight away they're telling you, because they haven't got that delayed gratification. They haven't got that sense of waiting. And yet these stones to me were saying, in our community, we're getting even more playful now. We're going to make it more difficult for you to know I'm communicating with you. And the fact that the people that make these stones put them there may not know if anyone ever finds them, and yet they can live with that. And that's that maturity of playing, that you can tolerate the fact that it's worth doing, even if nobody's ever going to see it, or even if you're not there at that wonderful moment when someone goes, oh, and you've missed that, but you still want to engage in that. And at the same time, I wonder if you've been doing anything a bit more playful in your community at the moment. Have you created anything playful in your community? And something that I did straight away, again, we live on the edge of an urban area, and in lockdown 1, if you remember that glorious weather, suddenly everyone was out walking. There were people walking by like I've never seen before. And having always worked with children, my first concern when we had the pandemic, the lockdown, was what sense are children going to make of this? How are children going to feel? How can I do anything about that when I'm shut in here? So I got my emotions bare and I put him in the window in the porch, and I thought, these children getting dragged on these walks that they don't always want to go on, and then there's this bear smiling out at them, and I really thought that might be something small I could do. And then I noticed when I was out walking, other people in the village had put bears in their windows too, and I thought, we're having a communication without seeing each other. This is just wonderful. And they didn't know why I'd put the bear there. It might have been some other reason, might have been some other communication, but it didn't matter, because we were playing and there was that communication going on. So I think communities all over the country have been doing all sorts of playful things to make those connections and to make us feel stronger. And I do wish, as I say here, that I'd thought of this, a new story for us. And it's actually from Salford Council for Voluntary Services, and encouraging people to get involved in communities rebuilding and changing and becoming more resilient. And for me, hearing this, it really does act like a nudge. And I don't know if you've heard the government's idea that we can't make people do something, we can nudge them to do it. And this nudge for me is saying, I want to be part of this news story for us. I want to be involved, create, connect with people, and I want to be part of growing towards better. And we know that playfulness is a huge emollient of us relating and getting on better and feeling safe with each other. A thought to reflect on near to the end of this quick flyby of play for bounce back ability is, play gives us the world, and through play we make the world ours. And I guess it's going back to Sartre. We've come in the circle now, and it's the fact that play is that fundamental. It's how we relate with the world and how we change the world. And our final thought, which probably is a quote that many of you are familiar with, life is not about how fast you run or how high you climb, but how well you bounce. You can find this in Islington's framework for mental health and resilience in schools, who've used the Komori quote at the very beginning to say this is what the mental health resilience in schools is all going to be about, how well we bounce.
And that was 2011, not even 2020. So it's that's really great. Thank you.
There's just a few resources for you that I think you might find helpful if you've been interested in how play can help us to bounce back.
Thank you so much, Alison. That's great. Gosh, there's 99 plus comments in the chat. In the first instance, I mean, I think perhaps you did go on to speak about it, but I think from the beginning you've been asking us to think about our own play. But just in terms of older adolescents and adults, how can we support them to engage in play activities? That would be helpful to think about, please, Alison.
I think it is really important that we get in touch with our own playfulness and our own play. I think modelling can often be really helpful. And I think if we think about playfulness as being play as well, that certainly with adolescents, we may be able to interact with them playfully, and that can really have some of the same impacts as play. There's so many things. I noticed at the beginning, at the chat at the beginning, that people were talking about how they've been doing more Zoom and more online play. play can come in so many forms. And I think sometimes with older children, in my book, Better Play in Schools, we do talk about this, that sometimes we don't see adolescents' behaviour as play, whereas when we reframe it, we may see that they're playing in ways that we didn't realise were play. And that sense of wanting to connect and how we do it, to me, that is play. And when we try and connect to somebody, and maybe it might be a little bit of nudging and a little bit of jostling, and how that might be a playful way to connect with others. And I think that more and more people are realizing that play is important, and that all sorts of things emerging, obviously not at the moment, but there have been, where adults can have play experiencing. And I'm thinking about escape rooms and all sorts of things around modern parts of towns where you find that there's all sorts of built environments that might encourage you to want to peep round a corner or run through a gap, because people are realizing that everywhere and anywhere could be a play place.
I'm just thinking about some of those really great free play places there are in parks, where people have put just really simple things like logs to balance on, or just sort of steps to run up a hill and then down again for no particular reason, not just like formal gym equipment, but or maybe people have grown hazel up into an arch and it invites you to run through it, or there's a little kind of 2-brick path that goes through it. Because my sense is that the escape rooms and so forth, they're quite elaborate, aren't they? But you're talking about a play that doesn't have a target. You're talking about much more spontaneous, let's just make the most, like we might on a beach or something, with shells or with water or whatever we find. It's the what's to handishness, isn't it, as opposed to but I guess there's different kinds, isn't there? There's formal play with a game or an online thing where you have to follow rules to get an outcome, but then there's this more organic, let's make something with what we have, den building kind of ishness, isn't there? So in terms of adults and older young people, how can we support them to develop that kind of play?
I think one of the things that I found adolescents aren't keen on is the word play. Adolescents may say, I don't play, even when they are playing and you're watching them playing. So I think play might not be a word that adolescents particularly want to admit to. So maybe not using that word might be some way of facilitating them to do that kind of play. So I do think that you go through a phase in life where you reject play before you embrace it later on, because the word suggests to adolescents that it's something that they want to have left behind in early childhood. But I guess that responding playfully when adolescents make a playful approach, and alternatively, some adolescents may really enjoy you trying to sense their play, because we know that adolescents like nothing more than to challenge us. And I guess that caring about, knowing about play really will open us up to see it all around us and to know when it's happening in ways that we may not realise at the moment.
Yeah, and I guess there's modelling as well, isn't there? As you say, perhaps we come out the other side and start to welcome play back in our lives, and being prepared to be seen as silly or critical, or all the negative epithets that can be thrown in our direction if we are seen as being silly or childish. And yet if it's our play and it's serious to us, then there's a modelling element in that, isn't there, for maybe some of the young people around us, that play is a serious business as well, because it's by choice and it's flowing. So there's an interesting comment here that says it's very sad to see that physical play is decreasing as children and young people focus on gadgets, many people being exposed to violent situations they're not ready for, cause them to confuse reality and fantasy in their thinking. I've seen them getting less tolerant. Children and young people aren't getting exercise to firm their bones, build their muscles and muscle memory, develop their GMS and FMS. I'm afraid I don't know what GMS and FMS stands for, but this person feels that they're not developing it. So do you want to comment on that, actually? Because I know that you've really researched this about the kind of value of online play and the negative side. Perhaps you'd like to give us some thoughts about that?
Yeah.
Given that how many children especially children and young people would have been engaging it, during COVID as well.
And it's still a massive conversation, and I wouldn't say that we know exactly what the answers are about how detrimental or beneficial online play is. But there is a lot of research how children can become more engaged in community and their civic responsibilities through play. There's a lot of online play, I mean, and there's a lot of online play that isn't necessarily something that we might be concerned about, that it involves violence or things that are not age appropriate for children. Although there is a lot of that, and I understand that we do all have big concerns about that. And I guess that the physical side of play is so important, and it's that play diet, it's having all of those different things. And if the online play is stopping the outdoor physical play, then that would be of concern. Whereas if there's a balance and both are happening, then that's clearly not going to be something that we're going to be as worried about. And it is, as I say, still something that is really at the forefront of a lot of play research about adolescence, is the detrimental effects of seeing and engaging in games that have a lot of violence in them. And we still don't really know as much as we'd like to, but we do know that there are detrimental effects and that children's brains can be changed by engaging in a lot of online play. And certainly being in lockdown won't have helped, because children won't be able to access some of the other things that are so important. Having said that, so many families reporting that their adolescent would have had no contact with their peers had it not been for online play, which has been so important.
Critical.
And so lucky that we have that now, whereas, you know, when I was younger, we certainly wouldn't have had that potential to engage with peers for all of those months. So there's been some benefits as well.
Yeah, it's important to see both sides, isn't it, to be balanced, because if we're very reactive with young people, they're likely to want to do it covertly, as opposed to trying to understand alongside them maybe what they get out of it, and to support them that way and ask what they think about the impact it might be having them. So to keep the conversation kind of proactive and open. There's another, and in a way this relates to this other comment, which says children rarely get the opportunity to resolve conflict or challenges in play because overprotective adults believe they're doing the best for them by intervening and shielding from those things. So that obviously relates to online play, if we were constantly preventing it as opposed to having a discussion about it with the child or young person. But if you're an adult observing, especially perhaps during COVID at this moment, maybe you're observing play that looks very disturbing. And we know last week's webinar was with Anne Dix talking about the rise in domestic violence, domestic abuse. We know that a lot of children are being exposed to that. So in a context now where the child comes back and is playing really disturbing play, to what extent does the adult stand back and allow this to continue without comment? And to what extent must we be noticing and wondering and getting involved? Because as this person is saying, if we don't give them any opportunity to play that through, that's going to be restricting. But on the other hand, if we ignore it, that's going to have consequences possibly as well. So how in your experience is it best able to hold the balance between those two?
I think that's such a lovely question from the participant. I think it's a really helpful thing for us all to consider, is how, when we're watching play, are we going to allow children to play so that they come up with their own resolutions for their problems, and where they learn their own skills for re-engaging with their peers when they fall out. And it's such a balancing act, isn't it, that sometimes we will be somebody who has to intervene as the adult, and other times we really must let children struggle and find their own way. And I think if we could allow ourselves to push our window of tolerance just a little bit, to watch children struggle and to not rescue them, and allow them to just stretch their ability to stay with how difficult it feels not to be rescued, and maybe come up with some way that they're going to, then that could be an ongoing process where we're going to keep stretching together, keep challenging ourselves together, and allowing the child to develop new skills and new strategies that they're certainly not going to develop, as your participant said, if we don't allow children to play for long enough. Some play, you know, the times that we allow for it are so short that conflicts will not even have the time to be resolved, let alone our ability to stand back and let them be resolved. And I guess that this is the time where I will come back to one of my play therapy trainings, whereas we put in as few rules as possible, but as many as necessary. So we really try not to put in limits or to stop things unless somebody's going to get hurt or something's going to get ruined.
Mm. And if you see very disturbing themes, I'm just got domestic violence, domestic abuse in my mind, or coercive control. If you see very disturbing themes, then what's your approach at that point?
Being heard is a very powerful thing. Being listened to is a very powerful thing. And this is such a short time for us to talk about such important things, but really listening to the play, witnessing the play, and feeding back that you hear how hard that must be, and being with that emotion, and not again rescuing, but just being with and empathizing and stating that you see how hard that is. And if a child's playing with a doll, something that you're seeing that's quite hard to witness
or disturbing in some way,
to say how hard that must be for that doll, and how it's not all right for a baby to have those feelings, or to not have someone who's come along and made sure that they're okay.
So affirming the real central messages that we want children to know, so perhaps it would give them permission to be able to articulate it perhaps in a different way, just by fully accepting it, isn't it? And I think what you're really talking about is that quality of undivided attention that you're giving in the witnessing. It's such a powerful thing, isn't it? Without interruption.
Yeah. I think it's really hard sometimes to witness play and to just be with the child and just let them know that you heard what was played.
Yes, in the richest sense. I was reading an article the other day about interruption and how when somebody interrupts somebody else, and I have to say it put me in mind of the Today programme on Radio 4, when people kind of cut across each other like this all the time. But just that in a sense, our systems seem to react to interruption, and especially that reverie of play, that being interrupted is experienced as a violent act in itself. So there is something about the quality, isn't it, of attention that we can provide to a playing child that can be supportive of whatever the process they're going through is. That if it is a full attention, undivided, empathic, attuned attention, that in itself can create something very special for the child, can't it? They feel our presence even though they're focused on the play so very strongly.
Absolutely. And it ties with the previous question about not being allowed to resolve conflicts. We're not allowed to resolve our own feelings about our own lives if we're cut short or if it's stopped.
And I guess one last thing I'd like to say, it's not related so much from the chat, but I was just thinking about your things around the bouncing back and the resilience and this word mastery that's so important. And of course, if we let a child struggle who then comes through and resolves a conflict either with another child or within themselves, that mastery is really important. And I don't know if people are familiar with the term ambiguous loss. Ambiguous loss describes losses which are not finite. So if somebody, if I, God forbid, if I drop my ring or something down a drain, God forbid, it's very likely that's the end. That won't happen again. It's gone. But if I lose it somewhere in the house, then I'll keep looking and keep looking and keep looking because I just know it's somewhere nearby. So that's an ambiguous loss because it might or it might not come back. And I've deliberately not chosen things around illness and death, but obviously one can think in terms of COVID, there are so many uncertainties around and we are losing so much at the moment in terms of having to deal with uncertainty. Pauline Boss is her name, and the book is called Ambiguous Loss, and it's such an important and helpful book at this time. And what it talks about in terms of how a great way to manage uncertainty is to look for islands of mastery. And it strikes me that just at this time of COVID, children's capacity to play and to have that control and to exercise that power and to experience mastery, it couldn't be a more important time, could it? To create play, whether it's putting the teddy in their window as well and feeling, I did that, I've contributed, whatever the tiny thing is, that it couldn't be a more pressing time for play.
Yeah, and it reminds me of Deb Dunn, who talks about the polyvagal system and trauma, and saying that what we have to do is hold on to the glimmers. And she's saying however bad the trauma is, there are glimmers. And what we need to do is notice them and celebrate them. And I really think play is a huge moment for Glimmer, and that being allowed to really immerse in it completely and just let go into it and not be stopped intrusively, as you say, is just so important.
Yeah, lovely. And people are saying here in the chat that, yeah, on the Gary Landreth course, that we can comment and show curiosity, but allow that feeling to develop. And working with teenage girls, they did want to play with small dolls, even though they look cool on the outside. I've certainly had that. I worked with some students in Cambridge with finger puppets. In the week one, you'd have never got them at it, but they were like absolute giggly kids doing it. It's absolutely magnificent. So if you don't call it play, it's a lovely Trojan horse just to kind of wheel in other things, isn't it? It's great. Alison, thank you so much for spending time with us. It's marvellous. I love talking to you, because whenever I listen to you talking about play, I feel an irresistible urge to go and play afterwards. So thank you for that. This is Alison's lovely book, Better Play. And there is also a film on the webinar with Alison actually talking about that and some of the other key things that are important for her about play. Lovely. Well, whatever you do this weekend, thank you so much, everybody, for taking part. Thank you, Alison, again. We're always appreciative of you giving up your time to be with us, because you all work incredibly hard, and it's just great to have you here. So please look after yourselves, stay safe, stay well, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.